Religion was not created by any god or goddess. It was created by humans to try to explain how the natural world, including humans, works. Before science knew there were moons floating around Jupiter, before science discovered how tornadoes and tsunamis and hurricanes are created, people needed a way to get our arms around some sort of explanation for these things. And we created beings greater than those who shared our mortal lives. And we built stories of how those beings are in charge of things. Now, every religion has its core values and stories, and many of them are the same narrative with different characters and venues. I find it curious when I stumble upon stories or rituals that are parallel within two or more created religions. Actually, noticing these similarities has led me to the understanding that we humans have a rather limited vocabulary for explaining and justifying our religions. First off, I offer a statement that is part of my truth. It may not be yours, but that's part of the beauty of the creation. I believe there is no religion that can teach us everything. No one religion has everything right, especially when we have evolved into an understanding of atomic structure. And since we now have photos of the backside of the Earth's moon, we do not need to rely on conjecture or fictional stories to explain some of the natural world's phenomena. We have science to help us understand. But where does that leave us with religion and spirituality and faith? The tale is very simple in Genesis 1:1, where God creates the heavens, the earth, and all within, and it allows us to think rather limited thoughts. Didn't God create the millions of galaxies that we have yet to discover? And who knows what lies beyond or beneath or in another realm that we haven't learned of yet? If we believe that God created it all, then science is part of that creation. There was a process and a plan to every molecule, every atom, every galaxy. Science is now our way of dispelling some of the fairy tales, some of the myths, and to be able to truly understand the majesty, the incredible master plan, the blueprint for everything. We no longer have to make up stories of how we got here. Science, I believe, is God's work. Faith and science do not need to be at odds with one another. This is my answer when challenged with the question, do you believe in creation or evolution? And I answer, yes. Because the Judeo Christian story of creation includes just enough vague language that we know it cannot be the whole story. It's too simple, like a child's explanation. I don't need to toss aside the Adam and Eve story, but I do believe that hundreds of other people were created simultaneously. They were just two of the throng. Nor do I need to cast aside the explanation of God creating land and sea, but I also know that someone had to form the swamps and the marshes and the bogs, those areas that are not quite bodies of water, yet there's no dry land on which to raise crops or build a dwelling. So it's somewhere between land and sea. The story is so simple that I can overlay the scientific knowledge on top of it and enjoy both. Bringing me back to the fact that religion is humans' way of explaining mystical phenomena, some of which we can scientifically prove, and some of which we just accept. We accept that we don't know. We don't know how, we don't know why yet. Religions were formed to explain mystical phenomena and give a framework for teaching people how to live their lives, exactly what to do, what to eat, how to think, how to pray, how to dress, and so on. My religion, spirituality, and faith have formed from my experiences, from hearing of other people's experiences, and then accepting that for which there is no rational or scientific explanation. There remains some huge force that is still unexplainable that set this planet, solar system, galaxy, and beyond into motion. And I can call that God. Or I can call it divine intelligence, or Brahma, or Great Spirit, or any number of other names. It's interesting to remember that Buddhists believe in no one creator or deity, but believe that everything is in a beginningless, endless cycle of natural law. When we say God's hand is at work, we can certainly look to science to explain how one drop of dew hangs on the tip of a leaf. We can say that it's God's hand at work, or we can simply enjoy the mystery. And very important to me is the idea that God lives within me and within you. God is the love between us and the force for goodness that we were born with. We are all born of a similar blueprint. Humans come in many physical variations, but our blueprint is for nearly symmetrical bodies whose faces point in the same direction as our 2 feet and whose arms are hanging at the sides of our upper bodies, with a brain contained within a hard globe and the rest of the necessary organs nestled sort of together in a centrally located unit. That's the blueprint. Now, there is a similar blueprint for some of the world's religions, which reinforces for me that humans have created all of these faith traditions. Let's look at some of the similarities among faith traditions. Several of them tell of a prophet, of a human who was selected to go to an isolated place to receive messages directly from God. Moses, Joseph Smith, Muhammad, Jesus. Another similarity is that Christianity and Judaism both share the ritual of wine, bread, and candles. Jesus called it the last time he had supper with his disciples. We've called it the Eucharist or the Last Supper, based on the Passover meal that it really was. The three traditional Hebrew Friday night blessings are of candles. Bless God who commanded us to light these Sabbath candles, and then the wine, blessing God who creates the fruit of the vine, and the challah bread, bless God who brings grains from the earth. That's very similar in behavior to a Christian Eucharist or communion celebration. Different reasons, different theology, but similar items being used for the celebration. Another piece of the blueprint is that people of many faiths wear special clothing to identify them. Monks, Buddhists wearing the saffron robes, priests, habits for some of the nuns, Jews. We have Muslims and Sikhs wearing turbans. A lot of faith paths have clothing items that identify the people. Holy day gatherings often feature special food. Many world religions include food as part of their tradition. Whether we're talking about not eating meat on Fridays or not eating during daylight for a month, or baking special challah bread, eating lamb on a certain Sunday, eating bitter herbs and drinking wine, eating curried chickpeas on the holiday of Vaisakhi. Many people use special food on special occasions to ritualize a remembrance of their history or to celebrate the wonder and awe of their chosen path. How about this piece of the blueprint? Water. Water is used for blessings. In last week's God Talk, I spoke of the grains of the sand mandala being collected as the mandala was cleared away, and then the sand is prayed over with each grain of sand, accepting those prayers, and the prayers are then washed out to sea or into another river or a lake as the grains of sand move along. They take the prayers. Christians use water to baptize their members. Some Christians sprinkle drops onto a person's head. Some immerse the entire person backwards in a body of water. Some Christians baptize infants. Some wait until the person can take vows of Christian membership themselves. Jews use a special pool of water called a mikveh to cleanse all material things and themselves before use in a kosher home. Muslims ceremoniously wash their hands, face, arms, head, and feet to purify the body before prayer times. It's called wudu and helps the person to feel cleansed before entering into the prayer room. When I studied world religions, the most powerful awakening was the realization that we are more similar than we are different. I was raised in a Methodist and Presbyterian church, one of each, in a then very conservative town. And when I realized that the family next door, whose children were my neighborhood playmates, was Catholic, I asked my mother what that meant. Her description allowed me to believe they were extremely different from us, and thus began my line in the sand of us and them. As I grew, I was taught intentionally and sometimes subtly that there were ugly words to use for people who were identified as other. Some people in my family used those words. And as I grew, I saw the hurt. And I began to form an idea that maybe people were more important than their faith path, their gender, what they wore, or where they went to college, or where they worshiped. Every human being wants to be heard and seen, to be noticed as a part of this creation. Every human being wants to know someone cares so much about them that it matters whether or not they remain alive. Every human being began as a baby. If they were lucky, they lived through toddlerhood, childhood, teen years, and adulthood. Through our life experiences and influenced by the people we met, each of us learned, to some degree, how to treat others and how to take care of ourselves. We are all more alike than we are different. If I had been born into a family in Barcelona, I would not have had to ask my mother to educate me about Catholics. If you had been born into a family in Delhi, India, you would most likely be Hindu. When we hear in the news of people from a faith path which we don't understand, let's at the very least be gracious to not jump to judgment. Learning more about one another is the key to creating the world where we will all be seen as children of the same creation. Blessings on all.